Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us as we're getting everyone checked in. But just a reminder, if there is an empty seat between you and the person next to you, please scooch into the middle so that way people can come into the seats without blocking you and disturbing your viewing enjoyment. Okay? So my name is Gloria Ko. I'm Director of Young Alumni and Student Engagement here at UCLA Alumni Affairs. So I want to welcome you back to campus for those who haven't been back in a while. But then also welcome you to one of our Young Alumni events. And so for those of you that don't know, about 47% of our alumni population is actually under 40. So a lot of our young alumni are actually quite young. And so a big part of the work that we do with Young Alumni Engagement is to put on events that are for you and to suit your needs. And so again, if you see me later and you have other ideas of what you would like to see, whether it's more programs like this or other ideas, feel free to come talk to me or any of my other colleagues. And so I want to welcome you tonight to our event, Lovewise, the science behind thriving relationships. When we were talking to alumni about what they wanted to see, relationships was a big, number one on the list, right? How to have successful relationships, how to have relationships that are amazing. These are all questions that young alumni or people in general, I think, want to know about, right? And so that's why tonight we brought you two amazing experts in the field. And so these two actually founded the Relationship Institute at UCLA, founded on the cornerstone that relationships, strong and thriving ones, really are the foundation of our entire society. They really do a lot of work today to educate couples, singles, basically anyone, about relationships and how to go about communicating more effectively and just being better in relationships. And so actually I'm holding one of their books that they have written, Love Me Slender, which actually is it's a new book, and it's about couples and how they can stay healthy and lose weight together. And so without further ado, I wanted to introduce these two. Some of you may have taken their class in communications, and so for those who did, I definitely did, and I loved it, so welcome back. But I have Professor Thomas Bradbury and Professor Ben Karney, and I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure, really a pleasure to see so many people turning out. And I'm Ben Karney. I'm a professor here in the psychology department. I'm a social psychologist.
And I am Tom Bradbury. I am a clinical psychologist, also in the psychology department. And I want to take some time today and tell you about some of the work that Ben and I have done over the years. And I want to begin by asking you a question. The question is this. Think about how old you are right now. And I don't mean to depress you, but think about how old you are right now. And think about what your life is like and compare it to what your parents' lives were like at the same age. So if you're 25 years old right now, and that seems about right, what were your parents' lives like when they were 25? How have things changed in that time? And when you think about all of the changes that we've undergone in the time between your parents were 25 and today, obviously the world's become a faster place. But the world's changed in other ways as well. And I want to tell you about two really important ways. First, the institution of marriage itself has changed very dramatically so that fewer people are marrying these days. The marriage rates are down dramatically in the United States. And for the people who do get married, they're getting married at a much later age, often in their late 20s or early 30s, sometimes even a little older if they live in an urban setting. We also know that there's thankfully great acceptance of lots of different diverse family forms. Lots of different kinds of relationships are appreciated and valued in the world today. So you might imagine that when your parents were your age and somebody in the neighborhood was divorced, like somehow that was a big deal. But for you, that's not a big deal. There's greater tolerance, there's a greater appreciation for all kinds of diversity today than there was many years ago. And our colleague at Johns Hopkins University, a sociologist named Andrew Cherlin, says that our relationships have become deinstitutionalized. And by that he means that we have relationships that are outside the institution of marriage. We have relationships that are really not as connected with even our own families as they once were. We have relationships that aren't so tightly integrated with our religious communities. So marriage as an institution is changing dramatically. It's a dynamic institution. But other things are changing as well. And the economy is one of them. The constraints that exist on all of us financially are probably far greater than they were for our parents. And we know that it's very difficult now to get a job in your early 20s and keep that job until you retire. That just doesn't happen anymore, but it happened to my dad. And so we know that the cost of living is rising. We know that it's more and more expensive to live these days. We know that the real earning power that we have hasn't gone up since 1964. We also know, as a result, that the need for two incomes is really high. In order to sustain a household, in order to buy a home, certainly in Los Angeles, it would help tremendously to have two earners in the home. And as a result, we now know also that there are many, many more women in the workforce than there were even 20 years ago. So our first point is that lots of things are changing. You exist in the midst of profound social and economic changes.
So Tom focused on change. The next point that we want to make is that even as the institution is changing, even as the socioeconomics of relationships are changing, intimacy itself ain't changing. Intimacy, the intimacy that bonds two people together, that's much more biological, and that's much more part of organic to what we are as human beings. And there's a lot of evidence that even amidst all of this social change, radical social change, which is changing the structures in which we have relationships, a lot is staying the same about what we want out of relationships and the dynamics of intimacy between two people. So for example, if you ask people, there's a lot of research, every decade or so, you ask people, well, what college students are often asked on a regular basis, what do you want out of love? What do you want out of a love partnership? And those answers are not going to surprise you at all. So what do you want out of love? Passionate excitement, security, someone to support you. Yeah, there's no rocket science to that. But what's more, those are things that are true not only in the United States, not only in Western cultures, but all around the world. It's sort of part of our human inheritance that we want to bond. Everybody all over the world wants relationships. And they want a relationship with somebody who is kind to them. Nobody wants to be abused. They want someone who is exciting to them, and someone who is safe, and someone who is a secure place to invest for the long term. Our colleagues in anthropology have studied cultures all around the world, from developed cultures to very tribal cultures, from cultures that are connected to the Western world to cultures that are very disconnected. And they find that a notion of romantic love exists in over 95% of those cultures, which is common enough to say this is sort of part of what it means to be human. And it's enduring. And so a lot of what we study is that enduring, constant part of intimacy, the thing that is true of us as human beings, even though the institutions and the economies in which we're having these, in which we're facing the challenges of intimacy are changing over time. And we study, why do we study it? We study it because it's inherently interesting, and we study it because there's a lot of research that shows, ours and others, that intimacy matters. And it matters not just because people want it, but because it's associated with, and it's kind of central to, a lot of other things that matter in our life. For example, our emotional health. Lots of research that shows that people who are happy in that if you ask people, how happy are you with your life in general? And then you ask people, okay, how happy are you with various specific domains of your life? Your work, your health, your friendships, your intimate relationships. By far and away, the domain that is most strongly associated with being a happy person is our intimate relationships. If you're in a happy, intimate relationship, you have a very good chance of being a happy person. And if your relationship is not very good, it's going to be very hard to be a happy person. But it's not only our emotional health. Relationships are associated with our physical health. People who are in satisfied relationships, in satisfying intimate relationships, whatever form it takes, tend to be happier, tend to be healthier. They tend to heal quicker from wounds. Their immune systems recover them. They recover from cold and flu quicker. And the opposite is also true. People in unhappy relationships heal worse. They're sicker than people who are in no relationships at all. Being in a satisfying relationship is associated with wealth. People in happy relationships are more productive at work, and they earn more over the life cycle than people who are in disrupted relationships or distressed relationships. And of course, longevity. The fact is, the success of our intimate relationships is literally a matter of life and death. People who are in happy relationships live longer. They recover quicker from disease. And people who are in unhappy relationships, well, they die quicker. Sorry. So it makes sense to study it. And Tom and I have studied it for the last 20 years. And the science of it, and how would you study it? Well, yeah, people write novels about it. People write poetry about relationships and have done so for thousands of years. Science on intimate relationships is less than 100 years old. And our science is about almost 25 years old. We're going to have a party for it. And what we'd like to do today is talk to you just about a couple of the things, or a handful of the things, that we've discovered in our work together on intimacy and what makes for healthy intimacy.
So Ben has told us that being in a relationship, on average, is good for us in lots of different ways. And being in a fulfilling relationship is especially good for us, pays all kinds of dividends. Now, what's interesting about that fact is that we know many people aren't able to reap those rewards. We know, you know, that the divorce rate is about 40%. About 40% of all first marriages will end in separation or divorce, and the rate is actually higher, not lower, for second marriages. We also know that among the relationships that remain intact, I've seen recent statistics suggesting that 25 to 35 of those couples aren't so thrilled either. We also know that relationship counseling is the primary reason in the United States, relationship problems are the primary reason why anybody in the United States seeks any kind of professional counseling. So relationships matter, they're hard to achieve, and so why is that? Why would that be? That's one of our central puzzles, one of the central puzzles that we turn to over and over in our research. And in many ways, we ask the question, why does love fade? Must it fade? How do our relationships change? And as you dig into that question, you realize that we in the general public and scientists like Ben and I have historically believed two main things about love. One is that at the beginning of our relationships, things are great. We're having sex all the time. It seems like we're learning new things about our partner each and every day. We look forward to being home with them at the end of the day. Everything's great. We want it to happen. But something changes, right? Something changes. So the idea is that it starts off great and that that affection inevitably fades as time passes. We have a colleague at Stony Brook University, Art Aaron is his name, and he calls this the honeymoon and then years of blandness phenomenon. Which I understand that if you're not married yet is hardly an advertisement for the institution. But we should ask, is that really true? Is that really true? And do we all have to suffer the same fate in more or less the same way? So as Ben said, we conduct a lot of research right here in Friends Hall. And we look for patterns of change. And this field actually began not with studying happy people, but with studying distressed couples, couples who were really in need of therapy. And about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people got together and said, instead of really trying to get the unhappy people to be happier, maybe it would be a good idea to see if we could keep the happy people happy and find out what changes. And so Ben and I align ourselves with that kind of work, and so we recruit newlyweds, often from marriage licenses. We then check in with them repeatedly over time, and we ask them to complete a lot of instruments and measures and procedures with us. But one of the things that we always do is we ask people, usually on a 6-month basis, to fill out a standard questionnaire about how their relationship's going. How satisfied are they in their relationship? People do this separately. They do this independently of one another. And we can collect valid data on people's reports of how satisfied they are in their relationship. And then we use statistical procedures that allow us to boil down all of that information into a few specific subgroups of couples that help us to understand what the basic patterns of change turn out to be. I'll show you the results of one of those studies. This is data that Ben collected at the University of Florida, actually. You can see data for men up on top and for women here on the bottom, and this is a 4-year period. So we check in with them 8 times every 6 months over 4 years. And this scale here on the left side, the y-axis, do you remember that from your undergraduate days? That's the y-axis. What you see is 3 different groups of couples. One group of couple that doesn't at all match that years of blandness phenomenon. These are people who start off happy and stay really happy. In fact, these top 2 groups are our biggest groups. There's another group of couples a little bit less satisfied than that, but they're doing pretty well over time too. So they're pretty happy, that's satisfied. In fact, you can't get any higher than that high group right there. But there's another group of couples. And what's interesting about them isn't just that they decline. In fact, they decline to the point where they're really on the verge of ending their relationship. That's what that data point means at the end there on the right side. What's interesting about them is that they start so low. We were really surprised, not that people became unhappy, but that the unhappy people were actually starting off their relationship not feeling so great about their relationship. And these people, again, first-time newlyweds, they come to our laboratory within usually 6 months of their marriage. And already there's a group of people who are telling us things ain't so great. And from that point forward, they might be thinking that they hope things are going to get better, but they invariably do not. This is another study. This is a group of couples all recruited here in Los Angeles County. Very similar idea. Same sorts of patterns, different measures, so the results look slightly different, but the idea is the same. There are groups of couples who start off satisfied and stay satisfied. There's no blandness to be had there. They've figured something out. Most couples actually do okay. What you want to avoid is being the couple in the group that starts off noticing problems, hoping they're going to go away, only to come to find out that 4 years later, those problems are not only still there, but they've grown worse, right? And over here on the right side, on the far right side, I show you the 10-year divorce rates on these couples. We checked in with them on their 10-year anniversary, and you can see that it's the bottom 2 groups, right? It's these groups here. These are the results for women, but there's their husbands right above. And it's these 2 groups here. That's where all the divorce is concentrated. In both of those cases, in all of those cases, between 40 and 60% of the divorces are happening in those groups. So we naturally say, well, what's going on right here? What can we measure about these couples? Not just how happy they are, but other things that are going on or that they can tell us about themselves that would help us to understand why their relationships are like that. And what we find is that this is the lower group. That's the higher group. You have to do things to keep people entertained, and this is one of them. This is a slide I show my undergraduates. In fact, I just finished my class last week, so this is a slide I show my undergraduates. But what you can see is that these are people's self-reported personality traits as newlywed couples, okay? And we ask them to report on how much negative emotion they experience and how hard it is to come back to a baseline, a more emotionally neutral baseline. We ask them to report on how angry they tend to get in general. We ask them how often do they make a lot of plans without thinking them through, how impulsive they are. We also ask them about their self-esteem. And what you can see is that the couples who on the previous slide were at the very bottom of the graph, you can see they have higher levels of negative affectivity. They experience more negative emotion. They're prone to getting angry. They do impulsive things a lot. And they have low self-esteem. And as you go up the chart to those couples who are really experiencing a very satisfying relationship, I think I'm back. You can see that the couples at the very top of that previous chart are way below the average in the sample for all of those characteristics, right? So those early signals, the things that we can pay attention to right at the beginning of our relationship matter. It's hard to communicate yourself out of these personality problems, right? If you or your partner has really difficult emotional experiences in these arenas, all the communication in the world is not going to get you into the very top group. So you want to be paying attention to what these signals look like very early, from the very start of your relationship.
So an implication of what Tom just told you is choose well. Like, it really matters where you start, and it really matters who you find when you're sort of making a long-term commitment to somebody. So how are you going to do that? Well, luckily, we live in an age where there's a lot of people who are willing to give you for free on your phone tools to help you find a mate. And this is now a big, big deal. And we get asked about this a lot, which is, does the fact that we now have internet dating and online meeting and Matchup and Tinder and Hinge and all these things, and by the way, if you're doing Tinder in the back, that is disrespectful. But now that we have them, is it changing anything? You know, how does that change the landscape of facing this really difficult obstacle, which is finding someone to create a long-term relationship with? And a while back, a colleague of ours at the Northwestern University, a guy named Eli Finkel, put together a team of researchers, and I was one of that team, to say, well, what does science have to say about the potential of internet dating to change how we date and how we mate? And it was really interesting. We reviewed all the scientific literature, and here's some of the things that we found. One is that internet dating really has come of age in the last 20 years, in the last 15 years, amazingly. And it's widespread, and it's likely to be a part of life as much as the cell phone has changed our lives. Internet dating has also changed it. And one of the reasons is that as internet dating, as it used to be that dating service is something that you had to sign up for outside your house, you had to leave your home to do it, and so people didn't want to do that. Once you could do internet dating and browse profiles from the privacy of your own bedroom, it became much easier to do. So more people did it, and then you didn't have to be private about it because everyone was already doing it. And once it migrated to your phone, it just became too convenient not to use. So right now, if you ask people if there's any stigma associated with internet dating, 20 years ago people would say, yeah, I'm a little embarrassed to tell you that we met through the internet. Nowadays, that stigma is way, way down as it's gotten more popular. A lot of young people, especially post-college, in college, not a lot of internet dating. Why? It doesn't matter. College is internet dating. But post-college, you have a bunch of young people who have not yet found long-term mates, all of them, and they've been deprived of the meeting structures that are around in college, so young people are a big market for internet dating, but they're not the fastest growing market. The fastest growing market are actually older adults, people who have lost their first partners either through divorce or widowhood. Older adults are the fastest growing market who are adopting internet dating. So now internet dating makes a lot of promises. You know, these are corporations and they're selling services. And they promise, we will match you up. Like use eHarmony, pay a fee, subscribe to this, pay for that, and you will find love. And the question that we asked as scholars was, is there any evidence that that is true? So we went and dug into literature. And one of the things that we've quickly found is that there's two kinds of internet dating services, and they're very different, and they make different promises. So one is an internet service that follows what I might call the Amazon model, which is to say, they say, we have all the product. Now you search through it and find what you want. So that's what Amazon does, right? As Amazon says, oh, we got every book in the world, so search through and find the book you want to read. And it's the same thing with something like Tinder or OkCupid. They're like, we've got hundreds of thousands of people, especially if you're in a metropolitan area like LA, we've got at least tens of thousands of people, but it's up to you to search through all the profiles and again, or swipe through all the people and find what you want. We're not going to tell you who you want. You figure out who you want. But then there's another set of services that follows what I might call the real estate agent model, which says, hey, this is too complicated a decision, finding a mate, for you to make on your own. Luckily, a real estate agent says, or eHarmony says, we have extra knowledge. We know more than you about what you would like. Let us tell you. We will find you a better match than you could find on your own. That's exactly the promise. That's why they charge the big bucks. And so the question we asked was, well, to what extent is it possible for internet and online services to deliver on the promises that they make? And the answer is that they can deliver on some promises and not on others. Well, what can they deliver on? There are certain problems, dating problems, mating problems, that the internet solves to a degree unprecedented in the history of humanity. And one is finding available mates. So pre-internet, how are you going to do it? You'd have to go to somewhere where single people are likely to be, like this kind of an event. But you still don't know. Some people are here with partners, some people aren't. So you're like, how would you know? No one's wearing a T-shirt, so you have to go up and say, oh, how's it going? And then if you're available, you say, well, I'm just here by myself or with my pal. It's a big problem. You have to figure it out. With the internet, you don't have to do that now. It's very easy to go online and find access to people, all of whom, by virtue of the fact that they're on Tinder, want the same thing that you do, which is find someone to match with. So that's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. And the other thing that we can do is if you've got a deal breaker, you can immediately weed them out. So let's say you say, I would date anyone who was single and voted for the same candidate I voted for in the last election. Or loved Chinese food, or I wouldn't vote for anyone who's, maybe you say I only want to date people who are my religion. People have all sorts of decision rules. Well, the internet, if again, pre-internet, you'd have to say, so, how are you doing? I don't know, who'd you vote for in the last election? It takes time to get there. But now that you have the internet, very quick. You can just immediately do a search, and now you're only looking at the people who have none of the qualities that you would reject. Let's say you don't want to date a smoker. Fine, then you'll never see a smoker ever on OkCupid. Amazing. So that's astoundingly efficient. That's a level of efficiency that's just beyond belief. And then even more, you can ping them. You can send them a note. So you can communicate online with people no matter where they are. You don't actually have to go and find them and meet them and go to a bar and wait for them to talk to you. You can communicate immediately with the people that you're interested in. That is an amazing efficiency. That rivals email for efficiency. That is really a technological marvel, and we should all just be amazed that we live in this modern age of wonders. So that's amazing. I don't want to put any of that down. That's incredible. But there are other promises the internet makes that, sadly, it can't fulfill. And the promise it can't fulfill is, basically, there's no evidence that anyone on the internet can choose a mate for you better than you can choose for yourself. Even though people do promise that, there is no evidence that that is true. And I'll tell you what. One problem is people still lie on the internet. So there's a lot of research on this. The way you do it is basically you bring people in, you sort of measure them physically, and then you go and look at their profile online. And the results of that are men lie about their height, women lie about their weight, and everyone lies about their age. And that's just the truth. Now, again, nobody lies too much because they know they're going to get caught. I mean, eventually you're going to see someone in person, and they're going to see that you're not 22 anymore. But the internet can't figure that out. So the problem with people not telling the truth is still a problem on the internet. It doesn't change anything. The other problem is that there's an enormous limit to what an online profile can tell you about whether you're going to click with somebody in real life. And there's my colleagues Eli Finkel and Paul Eastwick have done this work where they ask people to fill out a list of what are you looking for in a partner. And then they do like a speed dating study where you meet people who either match or don't match what you said you wanted. And what they find is that what people say in advance they want in no way predicts who they'll actually want to talk to after they've met a bunch of people. What we like, what we think we like, really does a great job of predicting what profiles we like, but does a bad job of predicting what human beings we like in face-to-face interaction. Does that make sense? There's a lot of research on this. It's totally true. So I'll just repeat it because it's so amazingly true. What we like in a profile has no bearing on what we like in a person when we actually meet them. So that means that we can surf profiles all night long and pick a profile. We're like, oh my God, that's the most amazing profile ever. You're so funny, you're so clever, and you like all the same things I like. Don't matter. It does not predict whether you're going to like somebody. And by the way, your parents know this because they're like, oh, I'm setting you up with someone, and it's perfect on paper that you should absolutely have a love connection. It doesn't matter because what's on paper doesn't. Okay, I'm not going to say it again. So what about eHarmony and places that say, no, we actually have a formula, a secret formula that will match you with someone that looks like you and that you will like. We have the formula. Well, what's the secret sauce? What's in that formula? Well, we don't know because they haven't published it. But the problem is this. The formula can only have as an input what you input into it before you meet somebody. So a lot of the formula boils down to similarity. They match you with people who are sort of like you and share the same values with you. But the problem is that romantic attraction is not solely a function of the two people. Romantic chemistry is not like chemical chemistry. Chemical chemistry, you take sodium and chloride and mix them the same way, you're always going to get salt. But people aren't like that. It's not that the qualities of you are going to fit with the qualities of another person like this. Although people think that way, that's actually not what happens. What happens is, no matter whether that person votes Republican or Democrat, and whether that person likes sports or opera, in the moment when you meet, romantic chemistry comes from an exchange of behaviors, not qualities. Romantic chemistry comes from you saying, you tell a joke, and the other person laughs. And then you get encouraged. And you're like, well, what about this? And they laugh again. Like, hey. And now something's going back and forth. Then they touch your arm. You're like, oh, my goodness, I love it. It's not random. There's a science to it. But the variables that matter are behaviors and not personality characteristics. And since you don't know the behaviors from the profile, no algorithm can work, and there's no evidence that any algorithm does. So what can you do? Here's what you can do. One is, don't sweat too much about your profile, because it doesn't matter. And don't sweat too much about reading profiles, because they don't really matter. Unless you've got some specific things that you absolutely need, like religion or smoking or something like that, nothing else really matters. So what you can use the profile to eliminate people you would never date, for whatever reason, and then get offline. There's a lot of evidence that the more time people spend interacting with people online, the more disappointed they are when they finally meet them in person. You know why? Because online, you're like, oh my goodness, and you don't know that much about the person, so you're filling in the blanks with the assumption that everything that's missing from the online interaction is going to be fantastic. And then you're more disappointed. The shorter your online interaction, the less likely that disappointment is to happen. So use the internet to find somebody who's nearby and meet them in person, because that's the only way to find out if you have a romantic connection, which actually makes Tinder not a bad idea, because it doesn't promise more than that. So go ahead and Tinder away if you're in the back. All right, so that's how I would use the internet. Moving on.
So you found your partner. Great. You've chosen well. You've used advanced technology and your own good common sense and maybe a little science to pick a good partner, to pick a partner who you think you really want to form a committed partnership with. That's fantastic. What do you do then? Then what do you do? How do you try to stay in one of those groups that's going to enjoy high levels of satisfaction and fulfillment? How are you going to be that kind of couple that you always wanted to be? And if you look at Amazon, if you look online at a bunch of books or talk to your friends or talk to your parents, they're going to say, well, what can you do to maximize the chances that you're going to have a great relationship? What do you say? Communicate. You have to communicate well. That's what really is going to matter, right? Lots of opinions, lots of books get written on this all the time. And when we think about what that means, usually we say things like, well, let's share our thoughts and feelings. Like, let's sort of get into one another's lives and find out what's going on. Let's find out what's important to each other, and let's be sure that we understand what we each want, and we work hard to meet one another's needs. We stay connected. Let's try to do that. Another person say, yeah, that's a great idea. That's what communication means to me. But what about solving problems? Because we're still going to be two different people. Even though we come together and we think we have a lot of similarities, even though websites sort of promote similarity between us, we're still going to be two different people. We're going to have different things that we want. We're going to have different things that we need. We're just going to want different things at different times. And we're going to have to negotiate those differences. Another person might say, yeah, that's communication. That's a great idea. But there's another part of communication, and that is that we're going to have to be working hard probably. We're going to have to try to meet our goals. We're going to have aspirations. There's going to be things that we're going to try to accomplish, and that might be hard sometimes. We might have a boss that gets in our way or coworkers who don't really work anywhere near as hard as we do. We're going to have difficulties, and we're going to need somebody to support us. We're going to need to communicate when we have things that we need to accomplish and when we need a little support doing that, right? So when we talk about communication, we talk about these different domains, these different ways of being with one another. We also have another assumption about communication. There are actually two very important assumptions about communication. One of them is that experts know the way, that people like Ben and I who have studied hundreds and hundreds of hours of videotape, we actually sort of know how to communicate well, and also that we can teach you how to do that, right? That's what all these self-help books are about. Well, we wanted to test that. We conducted an experiment right here at UCLA, and we recruited 174 newlywed couples, mostly from marriage licenses, also in movie theaters, newspaper ads, lots of different places. Some of them, they were all engaged to be married. Everyone was either newlywed or within 6 months of becoming married, right, when we first checked in with them. We then randomly assigned them to 4 groups. In the first group, we said, we have a way of training you in how to solve problems. We can teach you how to listen to one another when things get difficult. We can help you to reflect what the other person is saying. We can help you to brainstorm new solutions. We can help you implement those solutions so that those problems aren't coming between you and your relationship. And in fact, there was a well-established program that's been used widely. Many different people have used this program. It takes about 15 hours. We trained our students how to do this at the place that had developed this program. They came to UCLA. We recruited all these people. One group of people got 4 sessions, 15 hours of training. They also had a personal coach, a person who sat in on the lectures and then said, oh, that thing you just heard about how to be an active listener and not a defensive listener, well, we're going to now go to a separate room and you guys are going to practice that. And I'm going to point out where you don't do that properly, because I can teach you how to communicate better. We did something similar in social support. We said, okay, let's not worry so much about, in this condition, we said, let's not worry so much about how to solve problems. In this condition, the point we're trying to make is that what you guys really need to do is be able to empathize with one another and support one another. And after you're under a lot of stress, sort of get back to a good baseline. Get to a place where you're really sort of in a more emotionally quiescent state. And use the support within your relationship so that you both feel good about the challenges and the stresses that you're dealing with outside the relationship. Same thing. This is an intervention that we developed. We had really high hopes for it. 15 hours, same idea, 4 sessions at UCLA, also with a personal coach, right? So they're learning things about how to help their partner set goals. They're learning things like how to talk to your partner right when they walk home into the home at the end of the day, help to respond, help to relieve stress, that kind of thing. We had another group where we said we actually need some control groups. It's possible that there are parts of these interventions that would be effective just because people are coming to UCLA, just because they're part of a study. So one of the things you try to do is just control that part. So we said, okay, well, how can we create an intervention that looks like an intervention, but is really not an intervention? That was the challenge. So my grad students and I were sitting around one day and we said, here, try this. We're going to have people come to UCLA for 4 hours. And for 2 of those hours, we're going to have them watch a movie. And we're going to tell them that watching movies is good for their relationship. And then we're going to give them a list of movies, and we're going to let them pick from those movies. This was back when they had something called Hollywood Video. Stores, actually, brick and mortar stores where you'd go get a videotape. I don't know if you remember those days. And we would pay for those video rentals. And they had to do 5 additional videos. And then and we gave them some questions, and we asked them to relate the themes that you saw in the videotape to your own relationship. And in our heads, we're We're not going to teach them any skills. We're just going to get them to talk to each other. That's what we want them to do. Talk about your relationship. Don't learn any skills. Just talk about whatever video you selected. And they would send those back to us at UCLA, and we would read them, and they'd be really interesting. And then we would pay for the video rental. We always paid for the video rental. They didn't have a coach. They didn't have 15 hours. They watched a video at UCLA and a bunch of videos at home. Then we had a control group that didn't get anything at all. They just filled out the questionnaires for us. Okay? So you see the comparisons, right? What we're trying to say is, how important is what we experts know about your communication, right? So here's what happened. The control group, the group that only filled out questionnaires, within a 3-year span of time, after just 3 years, had a 24% divorce rate. It's amazing, isn't it? This is a group of couples who were just who had approached us saying, we want to be in a study, and then we said, here, fill out some questionnaires. Relationships are hard, and the early stages of relationships are the hardest, as you saw in that one graph that I showed where the rapid declines tend to happen earlier. 24% in the control group, but the other 3 groups had 11% divorce rates, including the group that only watched a movie. I can tell you that that guy who made the problem-solving intervention stopped returning my calls. Something else happened as well. When we plot out those 4 groups and their satisfaction scores over time, these are the 4 groups now with the men, the husbands on the left and the wives on the right, everybody went down in satisfaction to comparable degrees. So not only was it the case that the divorce rate for the group of couples who was only told to talk to each other and pay attention to their relationship, they were no more or less satisfied than the couples who had been trained intensively on how to respond to one another's problems or to learn how to support one another, right? One more slide on the data side. So we then did something else with these couples. As they were filling out those questionnaires, we also asked them to tell us about how their arguments have been going. How much intensity and anger has there been in their relationships in general, and especially when they're trying to solve important relationship problems? And we asked them that a couple times. You can see we asked them that at 6 months after the intervention, 1.5 years later, and then 3 years after they had completed the intervention. And what's interesting about this slide is that you can see the males again on the left and the females on the right. If you were in that green group, the group that stays flat, that's the group of couples that was instructed to work really hard to solve their problems, to not be hostile in their conflict whatsoever, to really not be negative, to not be critical, to not be judgmental. That's the group of couples that didn't go down at all in the level of conflict that they were engaging in. The very thing that we were training them to do, they did not do, especially when you compare it to the other 2 groups of couples. So the group there that is the blue bar on top, they went down. That's the group of people who learned how to support their partner. They went down in hostile conflict. They didn't learn anything at all about hostile conflict, but they got better at that. And the other group that only watched movies, well, they did the best of all. Okay? That is a very surprising result. So we have to ask, what's going on here? How did I come to create this control group that seems to be doing so much work? And this study led us to some important conclusions. One is that if you teach people how to communicate better, it seems to make their shortcomings more obvious. So if I were to bring you and your partner into my laboratory and spend 15 hours with you saying, yeah, you're not quite doing it right. You actually can do it a little bit better than that. And you stop them and you say, no, you're not quite doing it right. Like, let me show you how. There's a standard that you can meet, and guess what? You're not meeting the standard. That's frustrating. So anytime you then fill out that questionnaire about hostile conflict, for the next 3 years in your relationship, you say, actually, we're not meeting the standard. There's a standard here, and we're failing. And that is what we were teaching people, is that we're the experts, you're not, you're the pupils, and you have to listen to us and listen to our lessons and then try to adapt to what we're telling you how to behave in your relationship. Instead, there's a better message, and that's communication is profoundly important. The group of couples that got that intervention to only watch the videos, they were talking to each other a lot about really interesting things all the time. We saw it on the questionnaires that they were sending back to us. But what we all have to do is not listen so much to the experts. We have to figure that out on our own. We have to discover our own ways of having conversations with our partner and figuring out how they respond best to us, figuring out what matters to them. If I'm watching a movie, I can say, what do you think about that? Without really threatening my partner. I can look at a movie and say, wow, when you get angry, you remind me of that person. And she could say, if I were to say that directly to my wife, she'd say, what? But if she sees that in some amazing Hollywood actress being upset, she said, yeah, tell me more about what you mean, right? Some of the defensiveness is gone. So what we have to do in our relationships is figure out for ourselves. We have to discover for ourselves what it means to be close and how to communicate that closeness to the person we care about most.
That seems like a good idea. Now you know. Is knowing enough? Well, Tom just said, in essence, talk to your partner, which you probably would have believed. And that's not news. And the idea that you should not just talk to your partner, but take time to talk to your partner. It's news to see just how important it is, but you knew it was important. So why don't we all do it? There's a lot of other advice that you've got that's probably true in relationships, which is, you know what, don't call each other names. Like, raise your hand if you're like pro-argument. Yes, argue a lot. No? How about raise your voice, call each other names? Yeah, who's in favor of that? Not a lot of people. Not a lot of people. And yet it happens a lot in relationships. You know, people fight with their partners. They fight with their partners in ways that they didn't say, yes, I'm really excited about fighting this way. But it still happens. So the question that our research has also turned toward is, why is it so hard in relationships to act the way we want to, the way we know we ought to be behaving in our relationships? Why? What makes it so hard? And it's got to be something not obvious. Like, it's got to be something that we're missing. Like, what are we missing? Like, I'm looking at you, and I want to love you, and I am in love with you, and I don't want to leave this relationship, so why am I shouting at you? And why are you shouting at me? And when we tried to think of the answer to this question, we sort of thought of a metaphor of the invisible gorilla, which is a very famous recent experiment by a guy named Daniel Simons. Raise your hand if you know the invisible gorilla research is like a YouTube video. Some of you? Okay, those of you who don't, this is going to blow your mind. So here's what Simons did. You'll see, it doesn't look like it's about relationships, but it's totally about relationships. So he shows people a video, and he says, it's a video of people playing basketball. Count how many times they pass the ball. Sounding familiar yet? And so they count how many times they pass the ball. But what happens in the middle of the video, a person in a gorilla suit walks through the video, waves, and then keeps walking. Right in the middle. It's totally right out there. And a lot of people, like half the people who watch the video, if they were told in advance, count the basketball passes, fail to see the gorilla walking across the screen. And now, I'm not going to do the demo for you, but it's astounding. Like, people are like, what do you mean, what gorilla? And then you play it back for them, like, I totally didn't see that gorilla. You didn't see the gorilla? And you don't see the gorilla because if you're attending to something, you miss other things. If you're attending to something, everything you're not attending to can be invisible. In relationships, what are we attending to? What's the basketball pass of relationships? Well, it's our partner. It's our partner in the communication. And what's the gorilla? What are we missing? What we're missing in relationships is stress. What a lot of people miss in relationships is that what goes on between you and between me in our intimate relationship isn't only about what's happening between you and me. It's also about what's happening, the stuff that I can't see that's happening outside of ourselves. When we are under stress, it affects intimacy in ways that are pernicious, drastic, and hard to see. And we've talked about this a lot in our research over the last 20 years. And we've come up with two paths, two ways that stress affects intimacy, and for the most part, negatively. And there's these two parallel processes. And one is that stress changes the content of our relationships. When we're under stress, the things we talk about are going to be different. The experience of the relationship is going to be different. And so we have more to deal with when we're under stress. That's the content part. And when we're under stress, we're less able to deal with those things productively. So that is what we call in the business a double whammy. Stress is a bitch, as they say. So let's talk about both those paths in a little bit more detail. So stress affects the content of relationships. How? Well, you can imagine that when people are under stress, when people have challenges to deal with, health challenges, financial challenges, time challenges, then you're talking about them. Imagine what it does to intimacy if your conversations are, how are we going to pay these bills? Who's going to take the kid to the doctor? Whose turn is it to go and visit? Whose family are we going to visit this year versus last year? Those are the conversations you're having when you live a stressful life, as opposed to the conversations, what do you want to do this weekend? Where do you want to travel over Easter break? What did you dream about last night? What are your hopes and dreams? Do you want a massage? Which one of those conversations is more intimacy promoting? These conversations. It would be terrific if we could all talk about what kind of massages we like and what recipe would you like me to cook for you. But when you're under stress, you're having different conversations. So of course you're like, I wonder why my relationship doesn't feel quite as satisfying. It's because you've got a lot more unhappy things to discuss. And that's not the worst of it. When do partners interact? The way that two people who are in an intimate relationship communicate with each other depends a lot on what hour they're having that conversation. Can you imagine? Let's say you have something difficult to deal with. Okay, we have a difficult decision to make. We can't pay our bills. How are we going to deal with this problem? Or we have a disagreement and we're trying to resolve it. How does that conversation go if you have it at 10 a.m. on a Sunday when the day stretches out ahead of you and you've got nothing to do? Or at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when the kids are crying, no one's sleeping, and you have to get up for work in the morning? Which of those same topic, but which of those conversations are going to go better? Well, the people who have a leisurely life, who are having that conversation over crumpets on a Sunday morning, that's going to be a better conversation no matter who you are, than if you're having it at night and you're sweating and the air conditioning is out and the kids are sleeping or up vomiting and you've got some trouble. And then how much do partners interact? So, Tom's advice, and it's great, is watch movies together, communicate, figure out how you can communicate, and everyone gives you that advice, and it's terrific advice. But some couples have the luxury of spending a lot of time together. Some couples don't. If you're working multiple jobs and you have children, then the hours that you can spend where it's just you and your partner talking alone become very, very few. And if in those times, now you've got to make the hard decisions, then the time that you spend promoting intimacy, talking about your hopes and dreams, getting emotionally closer, becomes precious little. So when people are under stress, their experience of the relationship is constrained in ways that constrain intimacy. And it's hard to see. And that's the second problem. The second problem is our way of interpreting our partner's behavior is also constrained when we're under stress. The truth is that in a relationship, sort of staying close to somebody takes work, and it takes cognitive work, especially because our specific experiences can be ambiguous. Your partner comes home, and you're like, "Hi, honey, how's it going?" And your partner's like, "Yeah." You're like, "What? Don't talk to me just don't talk to me right now." You're like, "Oh, but I had a really interesting day. I want to tell you all about it." "I'm not interested right now." What's going on? What's going on with your partner? Now, you can imagine that you can interpret your partner's behavior two ways. You can say, "Wow, my partner is awful," or "Maybe my partner doesn't love me," or "Maybe my partner's like, what happened? I must have married the wrong person because my partner's so mean." Or you can say, "I think my partner's had a bad day. I think that partner needs a back rub and fresh cookies." You see the difference? That the interpretation makes all the difference, right? If you think my partner's being rude to me, doesn't care enough, now you're in a fight. Or if you think my partner had a bad day, now everyone gets back rubs and cookies. Well, it takes your effort to overcome your own sort of defensiveness, your own feeling like, "Hey, I'm a little hurt that my feelings aren't being cared for right now," to say, oh wait, maybe my partner had a bad day. You don't see your partner's bad day. All you see is your partner in a bad mood. The partner's bad day is invisible. And it takes effort to think about something you can't see. Here's the problem. What if I had a bad day? If I had a bad day, then that effort, that cognitive effort to make that leap and say, oh, she had a bad day, that might be beyond my capacity tonight. And this is the problem, that being stressed changes the meanings that we're likely to make. The effort that it would take to forgive, the effort it would take to give your partner the benefit of the doubt, the effort that it would take to think about your partner's invisible circumstances sometimes is beyond our capability, even if we know what to do. I'll tell you a little hint. Even people who study this stuff for 20 years don't always get it. And it's not because we don't know. It's because sometimes we don't have the capacity because life is challenging. And because we can see, and so when life is challenging and your focus is pretty narrow and your ability to sort of think broadly about what's going on isn't there, what do we see? We see our partners. We don't see our stress. We don't see our partner's stress. We see our stress real good, but we don't see our partner's stress. And that's a problem. And that means that even if we know what to do, and if we've read all the self-help books in the world, sometimes we still don't always get it right. We can't be the empathic, loving people that we want to be. What do we do about that? Well, what do you do about stress? Number one, avoid it if you can. And I don't mean that facetiously. So here's the facetious thing. Be lucky and rich if you can. That's the advice that my parents gave to me. The second, but there's another non-trivial implication of that, which is, we make decisions all the time. And some of those decisions make our lives harder. And some make our lives easier. And we think about the financial costs and benefits of taking that job or getting that promotion. We don't always think of the relational costs and benefits. But people make decisions that sometimes make your life harder. And you think, well, that's going to have a relational cost. Be aware of it at least. But let's say, okay, now we're stressed. There's some stresses that are totally beyond our control. Well, what you can do is pay attention. There's actually some research on this, really good research by our colleagues at Columbia University, Niall Bolger and his team, have shown that when people are thinking about the stress in their lives, it affects their relationships less. Because now you're like, wait a minute, if you remember, oh wait, my partner has a deadline, my partner's under the gun, my partner just failed the test, my partner just didn't get a promotion, my partner's in a bad mood for some reason that has nothing to do with me, it's easy to forgive your partner for being in a bad mood that night. So if we say, wait a minute, where's the gorilla? Stress is the gorilla. It's much easier to then separate the effects of stress from your relationship. And then there's two more things we can do, which is think about the meanings that we're making. So if our partner is in a bad mood, one possibility is it's my fault, or my partner is mad at me. But that's not the only possibility. And we can be conscious and mindful about our partners when we think about them and say, wait a minute, is my partner having a bad day? I mean, that's one thing we can ask ourselves to try to practice the habit of keeping the broader world in mind. And finally, we can help our partners to make meaning. We can be the ones that say, sweetheart, I had a terrible day. You don't have to figure it out, I'm telling you. And if you had a terrible day too, I promise one day it will be your turn, but tonight it's got to be my turn. Because it was so bad. At least I can say, it's not about you, but shut up. It's not about you, but I just can't. I promise I'll come back tomorrow. So the point being that we can, not only can we be mindful about our partners, but we can be explicit about helping our partner be mindful about us. Because sometimes there's things in our relationships we can control, sometimes there's things that we cannot control. Being aware of that helps resilient couples stay healthy.
So let's review. A few last points and then we'll summarize. Modern life is changing rapidly. Your relationships are not the same relationships that your parents had. The economy that you're living in right now is not the same economy that your parents enjoyed. And yet, as Ben pointed out earlier, our need for intimacy hasn't gone away and it'll never go away. It's such a core element of who we are and how our world revolves. And as we leave you today, we want to give you 4 ideas that we hope you'll walk out the door with. The first idea is that choose wisely. It's hard to overcome a relationship that starts off in a slightly rocky way. Our personalities matter profoundly, and you want to pay attention to the signals that are evident to you or maybe to your friends when a relationship is really getting started.
Our second piece of advice tonight was take advantage of what modern technology allows us to do, to both find a partner and communicate efficiently with our partner, but don't expect too much from that technology. Know what it can offer you, which is access and easy communication, and don't expect it to do what only you can do, which is find someone who's right for you.
Our third point was the importance of discovering for yourself on your own terms within your own relationship what good, healthy, comfortable communication means to you. And attached to this point, we like to add the idea that you should really be investing in your relationship, not by our standards, but on your standards, and invest in your relationship in a way that is just like the way that you invest in a retirement plan. Every day, every month, every time you get a paycheck, a little bit of money invisibly goes to this important thing. And in your relationship, your feelings and your partner's feelings, how you're getting on together, that's an important thing. Make small deposits in that account as often as you possibly can.
And the final point is, as much as there's a lot you can control in relationships, a lot you can do to make your relationships better, there's other things that you cannot control. There's things that will be beyond your control, surprises, things that are outside of yours and your partner's control. Be aware of those things. Attend to those things. And relinquish control over those things. And that's a way of forgiving yourself and your partner for the inevitable ups and downs. And that's sort of what resiliency looks like in the long term. And that is all that we've prepared for you this evening. But thank you. But we do have, for those of you who aren't running out, it's time for questions and answers. We told you almost everything we know, but we might be able to address some other questions on other topics if you've got some. I think there's a microphone possibly running around.
And just to preface this, again, please think about questions that are good for the whole group. There will be time afterwards if you would like to speak with them individually. But remember, this is a Q&A portion, not the therapy session. So, but we do want to take we do have some time for questions. So do I have a question up here?
I see someone in the front of the back there.
Give me just a second.
I think she in the blue.
Hi, thank you for this fantastic presentation. I would be interested, for the benefit of the group, if you could share your views on texting as it relates to dating and I think slowly merges into pen paling as far as building intimacy and the things you talked about.
The technology is complicated, isn't it? It has this great potential to keep us close. Even while I was in the background, I could have been texting my wife, telling her how fantastic I think she is. And yet that might have offended other people who are important in my life, like Ben.
I would have been fine with it.
And so we have to use tools in a smart way. And in a relationship, often that means figuring it out, like having a conversation about how that's going to be. In busy lives, like the kinds of lives we lead, it's kind of hard to not check your cell phone when you're having dinner with your partner. And maybe it's hard for your partner to resist that temptation as well. We have to be forgiving and willing to be forgiving about that. But, it's the kind of thing that every relationship will figure that out in their own way. But if it is annoying to you and your partner, you have to have that conversation. You have to talk about it. Lots of things work better with ground rules. You don't always have to enforce the ground rules, but as long as it's an open discussion, that goes very far in relationships.
What I would add to that is that my sense is that texting magnifies whatever your communication already is doing. So if you and your partner communicate well, texting is another way to do that. And another way, if you make each other feel good, texting is another way to do that. And if you're having a fight, texting is another way to do that. So whatever your relationship has, texting just turns up the volume and makes more of it.
We have another question here.
Thank you for that great talk. I was curious, with all this data that you gathered, do you think you have enough material for a predictive tool that could potentially predict whether a relationship is going to succeed or end in divorce?
Okay, I will take that. I will
You
take
will take
that.
this question. Okay.
We've gathered a lot of data. a ton of data. And the point of it, and we've supported a lot of theory and written a lot, and the point of it is that you can't always predict. The theory says you're not going to always predict. In fact, it's going to be hard to predict because things happen that are beyond your control. If everything important to relationship success were in place at the beginning of the relationship, then you could predict really well. Tom showed us that a lot of it is in place, and we can predict okay, but we'll never be able to predict perfectly because because stress happens. Some people are lucky. They get that job, they get that promotion, they get into the graduate school they want to get into. Some people are unlucky. The plant closes and they're fired, their kid is sick, their parent is sick, and because there's stuff outside of our control, we're never going to be able to predict with that high degree of accuracy from the beginning.
I'd only add to that predictive models that we have been able to put together are reasonable and reasonably robust. The trick is always getting them to replicate in a second sample. And this is where all the issues that Ben is talking about come into play, which is, there's randomness that we just can't account for, and that really thwarts some of our predictive efforts. But what that has it's not just a scientific academic issue. What it means is within our relationship, we have to be aware, as Ben said in the last part of the talk, we have to be aware that there's a huge randomness factor, that sometimes the 405 is really jammed. And it's probably not your partner's
Pretty
fault.
much all the time.
Pretty much all the time. And that's just got to come into play. We have to learn how to be forgiving, and we have to sort of, I think if we did have a better understanding of a kind of a resilience in the face of stress, we'd probably do better at predicting more of the couple's outcomes more of the time. But there is a very large random component that undermines some of those efforts.
We have our next question up in the front.
Have you studied the length of time people date before getting married and how that affects your divorce rates?
There is, everybody heard the question, which is there some association between how long you stay together and something about the relationship and whether it succeeds or not? There is an unfortunate confound, we would say, in that, which is that as your relationship is getting older, you are getting older as well. And what that means, often that's a very good thing, because within reason, because that means that you're probably also maturing, you're probably also learning how to make better decisions, you're probably becoming more comfortable with each other within the relationship. But then what really comes into play, I think, is if there's dispute about that, if there's debate within the couple about one person saying, I really think we should get married, and the other person saying, is now really the best time, like, I love you, that's not a question, but is now really the best time? And the other person's thinking, well, why is this person resisting the fact that I want to marry them? And those are the issues that I think have to get worked out. It's not just the passing of time, unless Ben knows a study that I don't know, which is possible, but that it's really the difference within the couple about how that passing of time is going to get managed. And if one person, it just seems like they're on a faster track than the other person.
So the short answer is there's not any perfect length of time that's associated with relationship success. I did see one study that said that divorce rates were higher for people who dated very small amounts of time before they got married, and for people who dated very long amounts of time before they got married. And people who were right in the happy middle had the lowest divorce rates. But what is the actual length of the happy middle? I don't know.
Our next question's right here.
Thank you. It's a bit of a follow-up to the predictive model question. I understand you can't take out all variability, but of your high group and your low group, when you're studying a longitudinal study, are there particular traits or attributes of those types of couples that were more resonating with the high group and then more so with the low group?
Yes, there were. We were really surprised to see, let me go back to this slide. It's a really good question. Really surprised to see, one of the things that we expected was it's this idea. One of the things we expected to see was that stress would grow over time. That what would happen in relationships is that you wouldn't be stressed, you're newlywed, everything's great, and then as time passes you become more and more stressed. As Ben said, maybe it's still essentially invisible to you, and then you end up getting clobbered by it. What's interesting is that that stress is present from the start. So when we ask couples about chronic stress in their lives and the acute stress in their lives, that is much more characteristic of these couples who are really struggling early on. So that is not a sort of a process that emerges over time. That's a process that, surprisingly to us, seems to be in place from the very beginning. We also find that some indices of communication really do matter. And I think this point I was telling you earlier about the importance of discovering for yourself what good communication really means is true. But at the same time, we can look at videotapes, study videotapes, and see some indices of communication that really do seem to matter. And one of the more robust patterns that we've seen and that we see in, that other people have found in other laboratories as well, is this idea that you can actually be a fairly mediocre communicator, like not doing all the stuff that you see on Oprah and all the, the psychologists speak, that kind of thing. You don't have to do a lot of that, but you have to do it with enthusiasm. Like if you can convey, even in the midst of a problem-solving discussion, that you sort of like having problem-solving discussions with your partner. Like if you can say to your partner, wow, I totally disagree with what you're saying, but I'm so glad it's you and me having this discussion. Like I would rather disagree with you than anyone else in the whole world, right? So you don't have to be you can be really clumsy. You probably don't even have to solve a lot of your problems in relationships, but you have to talk about them in a way that's not threatening to the other person. And if another person feels aroused and agitated, there's studies of cortisol in the bloodstream, which ends up predicting bad health outcomes and bad relationship outcomes. If you sort of create a tense, hostile environment in your relationship, you'll eventually pay a price for that. But conversely, the best message is find ways to talk to your partner with humor, genuine interest, and genuine affection. And our studies show that almost completely eliminates, not the negativity, you want to keep the negativity at bay, but it completely eliminates any sort of clumsiness and inability to be really super articulate or really effective as a problem solver. What matters, surprisingly, and you saw it in the personality traits that I talked about, is the emotional tenor of things. Is this a safe place for me to be? Is this a comfortable place for me to be? Am I sort of happy? Is this fun? Am I enjoying this? And to the extent that you and your partner, even in the midst of talking about difficult, weighty issues, can both sort of convince each other that you picked the right person and you're in the room with the right person, that goes miles for keeping your relationship healthy and happy. And we can code that in videotapes. And really, it's humor, interest, and affection that do a lot of the predictive work.
Great, we have one last question.
I guess this is about living together, cohabitation before marriage. I know there's been some studies that say that living together before marriage predicts a higher rate of divorce, but I know now some are not saying that, but that marriage, that it's not there's nothing that shows that living together before marriage is beneficial. And I just wanted to know what you guys thought of that.
Ben knows a lot about the different types of cohabitation, so I'll leave that to him. But you're right, there historically had been this interesting, what we call a paradoxical association. Most of us would say, oh, if you're living together, you're sort of getting to know one another, and that should make for a better relationship. It turns out that the opposite was true, probably because the people who chose to live together, and these are old data now, the people who chose to live together actually might have been a little risky. They might have been resistant to getting married, and because of that resistance, they went on to get married and then would end up having a rougher course of their relationship. We call that a selection effect. More recently, though, and I think you're alluding to exactly these findings, which is now that living together has become so normative, and that's one of those big changes about how our relationships are different now than they were 25 years ago, is it's just a normative experience. It's just very common, as had been the case in Europe, and is still the case in Europe, is just really common for people to live together and maybe not get married at all, or maybe only get married after they've had children. But there's actually a number of different pathways into and out of cohabitation, and Ben will talk about that.
Turns out that there's not just one thing called cohabitation. So in the research, they define living together as anybody who shares a residence. If two people who are in a relationship have one address, they're living together if they're not married. But it turns out that that group contains 4 subgroups. So there's people who are in fact engaged, but they've moved in before they got married. Those people don't have any higher divorce rate than anybody else. Then there's people who live together as like a trial marriage. So like, well, we're living together. If it works out, we'll get married. If it doesn't, well, we'll break up and we will spare ourselves the expense of divorce. Those people have a higher rate of divorce. Then there are people who are living together and they're not even monogamous. You know, like they're not. There's no intention to try. It's not a trial marriage. It's basically a cohabitation of convenience. And those people, if they do get married, also have a higher rate of divorce, but it's a small group. Then there's people who live together who it's a replacement marriage. They have no intention of getting married, and they don't get divorced because they don't get married. So the point is that there's very little evidence. There's very little to no evidence that the decision to live together without a marriage license in your hand actually causes any problems in your relationship. It's sometimes, for some of those groups, it's associated with later marital problems, but those marital problems are not the result of the decision of living together. Is that it?
Yes. So thank you so much. Join me in giving these awesome professors a round of applause. We will be going into a networking opportunity, so networking time. So if you want to come talk to these 2 professors, please feel free. However, I have a couple of announcements. We do strive here at Alumni Affairs to provide programming for you that is relevant to your life. And so if you have any ideas or thoughts of what you'd like to see, feel free to come talk to me or any one of my colleagues who happen to all be wearing green today. That was by mistake, but it was a happy convenience. So also, we have a couple of events that are coming up. We actually have a Google Hangout on air tomorrow about living globally. So if you are interested in finding out how to live and work abroad, please let us know. We can get you that link so that you can sign in tomorrow. It's actually at 11 a.m., so you could maybe watch it during an early lunch break or something. Also, next on March 25th, we have a Networking 101 that's actually hosted by the Young Alumni Professionals Group. So it's actually a wonderful networking workshop that's actually done by an alumnus. And so if you're interested in that, we will actually be sending links to all these different events to an email to you tomorrow. Also on April 23rd, we have our Healthy Living, Healthy Skin event. So if you're interested to learn about how to make healthy choices about your body and also that affect your skin, that's also a great one. And also on May 16th, we have Alumni Day and also Spring Sing. So for those who went to Spring Sing as a student, it's only going to get better. And so that's going to be in Poly Pavilion on May 16th. And also we have Alumni Day, which has a ton of new programming for alumni. And so it's a great opportunity. You get to eat in the res halls. You get to have a wonderful reception in Wilson Plaza. And so it's just a fun time. And so we'll be sending links to all these different events on a thank you email for you. So don't worry, you don't have to take notes. And also check out our Facebook, Young Alumni Facebook page. And also you get a monthly e-newsletter. So if you don't get it, let us know. We'll make sure that you get it so you know about more programs like today's that we want to offer you. So also fun time, an opportunity drawing. For those who dropped your business cards into this bowl, you actually have a chance to win a signed copy of Love Me Slender by these 2 awesome gentlemen. So Sandy, will you do me the honors? So the winner is Hector Lagunas. Are you here? Yay! Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. We have a little bit of food left, so please feel free to help yourself. Or if you'd like to talk to any of our 2 speakers today, come on up to the front and chat with them. Thank you.